Hi there and welcome back to my channel. This is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video we're discussing Emperor of Thorns, written by Mark Lawrence. It's the last book in the Broken Empires trilogy. It's a grimdark fantasy, so it's very dark and violent in nature. A lot of dark themes going on in the story. I enjoyed this story, but not as much as the first book in the series. So the first book out of all three, for me, is the strongest book in the trilogy. The conclusion of this book, and the conclusion of the whole series, I didn't enjoy at all. I was let down by the conclusion. I thought it was a mistake the way it was written. It wasn't very strong. It just felt like it was tacked on at the end. And after all the build-up in this story, after all the build-up in 3 books in this series, that conclusion is a very big letdown for me. And I wonder if it lets down other readers who have read this, because I just thought it was just so weak compared to the rest of the series. So how do we get to book 3 in this series? So in the first book, we first meet George. He's 14. He's leading a group of mercenaries called the Brothers, and he has a plan to seek revenge on his father for not taking action after his mother and younger brother were killed. So through book 1, a few things happen, and by the end of book 1, George remembers who was responsible for the death of his mother and his younger brother, and he seeks out revenge on that person. And that person was his uncle. And in book 2, we learn that he took revenge, and now he's the ruler of his uncle's kingdom. In book 2, he's protecting his kingdom from an invasion, from a huge army from another kingdom called Arrow. And by the end of book 2, he defeats that invading army, and he then becomes the king, the ruler of other nations in this world. So I think now he has 8 nations or 9 nations that are underneath him. So he's quite a powerful ruler in the world already. And this story is all about him wanting to become emperor. He wants to take his 9 kingdoms, and he wants to convince other people to support him to become emperor in this thing called the Congression, which is like a collective of rulers from all the 100 different kingdoms. The Congression occurs every 4 years, and it's a chance for all the rulers of the kingdoms in this world to meet, and they vote to see if they can vote in an emperor. There hasn't been an emperor for many years, but George is hoping to turn that around, because there's another threat to the kingdoms, and that threat is from the dead king. And this dead king, he controls armies of the dead basically. He's like a necromancer, and he rises dead people up, and they're his army. So they're quite unstoppable, some of them. And there's these other more powerful undead creatures called Lich Kings. And I think there's 7 of them in the world in total. But they're very powerful and almost unstoppable. And that threat, George hopes, will be the driver for all the other rulers in the kingdoms to vote him as emperor. The structure of this book is much the same as the other books in the series. We have 2 main storylines and a minor storyline. So the first main storyline isn't the present day, when George is now 20, and it's all about him going to this Congression to try to be emperor. And it's also about his wife Bianna giving birth to their first child. Now that plays out in this present day storyline. The second main storyline is about George going on another quest to learn more about the world and more about himself. In this book we have a lot of world building, and that comes about in this past storyline. I think that world building, while being very detailed, very interesting and intriguing, should have happened earlier on in the series. I think that's a letdown to readers. We shouldn't have to wait to the 3rd book, the last book in this series, to have detailed world building. What we do learn though was very engaging. It told us a lot about the world, it told us about the past in this world as well. It told us, about the magic, or the so-called magic in this world, and gave us an idea about all the different elements in this world that are tugging things left and right, trying to get power, trying to get their way in the world, and what that would mean if they did get their way, if things happened in the world, and if George didn't stop certain things from happening, because he does in this storyline as well. So that was quite engaging to see, but I do wish that detail was earlier on in this series. The third storyline follows a necromancer called Chella. Now, I enjoyed this storyline despite it being very small in the whole scope of this book. And I think Chala would have been a much better villain if she had more pages in the story. Her point of view should have been expanded more, I think, in this book, because she feels quite weak as a villain, and that's because there's not enough of her in this story. It doesn't feel like a big threat in the story either, even though she'd be quite dangerous. I mean, she's a necromancer, she raises the dead, and we're led to believe she's quite dangerous as a character. But you just feel like she's not as dangerous as the author wants her to be. And that's because her chapters are very small. She's not given a big scope to open up as a character. The author doesn't have her doing things that are quite lethal in the story either. It just feels like she's almost like a cartoon in a way in this book. So it's a letdown as a character to have a villain that just feels not as lethal as she should. She's almost like a soft villain. She's there for colour, to add texture to the story. And you just don't get the impression that she's a threat to the main character at any time in this story. So reading this book, that was disappointing. The main villains in this book, Chala, with her storyline, and also this Dead King in the present day storyline, both of them didn't feel like real threats in the story. The Dead King is meant to be very powerful. He controls armies of the dead. He controls vicious undead characters in this world, but he just feels very weak as a threat in this world. He's a weak threat to George, our main character. And despite this idea of Dead King, his invading force being the main driver for George trying to convince people to vote him in as emperor, the threat, the impetus for that isn't really there. It doesn't feel like a major threat in this story. And that was so disappointing because he could have been just handled a lot differently in this story. I mean, having a character like that opens up so many possibilities in this world and this story, but he just wasn't used, I think, as much as he should have been. So that really sums up book 3 in this series. But this book suffers from pacing a bit. For me, out of all 3 books in this series, this book is the worst for pacing. There are moments where it just drags on so much in this story. And we have some exciting moments, of course. We have some twists and surprises. We have real excitement in the story, but it's not enough. There's big sections in this story that are just very slow and they drag on a lot. In this story, we see a return of other characters from the first 2 books in the series, and it needed that. This book is heavily George-focused, our protagonist. Most of it is about him. And in a series like this, in a world, when you're creating a world, you need to concentrate on other characters in the world as well. So I'm glad we have other characters return to this book in the series, but I think we needed more about them. They need to be fleshed out more in this world, and that didn't happen. That was disappointing. So despite the fact that George is an amazing character, he's a great character in this series, we need more from the other characters in this series as well. The conclusion, look, I didn't care for it at all. I think after 3 books in this series, it was a big letdown. I felt ripped off, basically, with this conclusion. I would demand a rewrite, but who's going to listen to me? But I think this conclusion is just a huge letdown, and I was so disappointed with it, and it does colour my view of this book. Let's look at George again. Being the main character of this series, this book also focuses on him for, I'd say, about 95% of this series overall. That's his point of view. As a character, he develops quite well throughout the series, and he learns different things throughout the series as well. So I did like that about him. I like the fact that there's growth in the character, and towards the end of the series, he learns about other people. He learns about caring about other people, one person in particular, and I won't go into what that is, but he learns about caring about that person, not just himself. So I did enjoy that in George. I like the fact there's growth in this character. Chala, who's a necromancer and meant to be a threat, a villain in this book. She could have been used much more in this story. She has chapters from her point of view, but they're very small. And I think she's not developed as much as a threat as she should have been. It's a big miss, I think, in this book. There's no really big threats in this book, and this character could have been much more. I found this character very engaging. I found the character very exciting. I thought this character could have been used and could have been more dangerous in this book, but she's not, and that was so disappointing. The Dead King, I think the author was trying to make him to be a bigger threat than he came about in this book. He feels like he's in the background a lot in this story. He feels like a cartoon threat. He's not a huge threat to the main character, and he feels inconsequential to what happens in this story, basically, for most of it anyway. I think the author missed out on a big opportunity with this character. The Dead King could have been a huge threat in this story, very powerful, and he's meant to be a powerful character in this world, but it doesn't come across as one. He comes across as very weak. He comes across as that no matter what he does, there's no consequence to the overall story or to whatever anybody else does in this book. So as a threat, a huge miss. I would like the Dead King to be a bigger character. In fact, I think take the Dead King out and make Challa a bigger character, because Challa was much more engaging in this story. So book 3 in this series, despite it being quite a mixed bag for me, and the least enjoyable for me out of all 3 books in this series, I still rate it a 4 out of 5. And that's because of the character George. That character is still amazing in this book. He's just so unique, the way he's constructed, the way he's developed, and that character growth for him in this book was also very well done. I also like the way the past and present storylines do merge with their concepts and ideas. That was really controlled and well done. It shows a lot of skill with the author, with their planning, their plotting. So I did like that in the story. So those 2 elements make up a lot of this rating. The other character I like is Miana. I think Miana, who's the wife of George, is a good standout character, and also Challa, even though Challa is not used very well in this book, I think, as a villain, could have been used a lot bigger in this story. Very good character in the book. On my channel, I review other fantasy books. If you enjoy fantasy, check out my channel and subscribe. On the screen now is a link to a video for another book I'm sure you'll enjoy.